Shalom from Jerusalem. I am Miri Eisen, and this is Israel War Update. 391 days. That is the day that we are at in this war of Hamas, Hezbollah, other Shiite proxies, and Iran directly against Israel. 391 days, 101 hostages. Israel has been in a multi-front war for over a year. The war that started by Hamas on October 7th continued that same night with Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy, joining in. And from then, we've seen the other Islamic regime's proxies, both from Iraq and from Yemen, and Iran itself, the Islamic regime, directly attacking Israel. To discuss the latest developments, we have with us today an esteemed panel of Inside Israel, retired Brigadier General Yossi Cooperwasser. Yossi is the former head of the Research and Assessment Department of the Israeli Military Intelligence. Shalom, Yossi.
Shalom, good to be with you.
We have from the United States, again, retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, who is the former Assistant Secretary of State, and he is joining us right now from the United States. Mark, thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Mira.
And I'd like to welcome our own TV7 editor-at-large, Amir Oren. Amir, bring us into the latest developments, please.
Thank you, Miri. So as we are closing in on the 400 war, only 9 days to go. As we are speaking, sirens are going off in urban and rural of Israel. It is almost continuously being heard throughout Israel, mostly from Lebanon, rockets and drones being launched, but also from Yemen and from Gaza, sometimes from Iraq. By pro-Iranian militias. Earlier today, 5 civilians were killed in the northernmost settlement, northernmost town in Israel, Metula, 1 Israeli national and 4 foreign workers from Thailand. There are also, by the way, Thai nationals held captive by Hamas. They are among the 101 hostages, both alive and dead. Now, there are hectic diplomatic activities regarding the hostage and ceasefire deal being negotiated with Hamas through mediators. Apparently, Hamas is rejecting the latest offer, and a more hopeful sign that maybe in the north, the formula suggested by American mediator Amos Hochstein could be acceptable to Israel and perhaps even to Lebanon, which is actually Hezbollah. So as we are only a few days away from the elections in the United States, maybe there will be some minor breakthrough later this week. There are only 2 days to go, or early next week.
It's a wonderful thought to think that we could arrive at something. Mark, I'm going to ask you about that in that sense, because there's no question that this United States administration has been involved, is trying to arrive at some kind of a resolution when it comes to what would be next in Lebanon. And I want you to look at that for a moment and tell me, so there's all of this different ideas. What is really feasible? Do you really think that right now we can arrive at some kind of a resolution that would be acceptable both on the United States and on Israel, and more importantly, on the different Lebanese players? It's not just Hezbollah. There are a lot of players there inside Lebanon.
Yeah, there certainly are some bases for negotiations and perhaps for a ceasefire, but this latest notion that somehow 1559 is being brought into consideration is ridiculous. I was wondering a few days ago when Hochstein continued to say any ceasefire has got to extend beyond 1701. I thought that might have to do with perhaps moving Hezbollah forces a little bit further back from the Litani, recognizing the longer distances of the rockets. But to somehow drag 1559 which is the resolution that calls for the disarmament of the militias, into the discussions is just an absolute non-starter. So either I am reading this wrong, or there's a proposal out there that is as likely to be accepted as America giving Texas back to Mexico.
That was not something that we expect in the near future. And Yossi, I would say in that sense, looking at it from the Israeli perspective, both with bringing into the issue 1559, as Mark said, that is not something until now. We always were talking about 1701, which has to do with the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon's mandate in Israel, inside southern Lebanon, as opposed to 1559, which is about all of Lebanon and no militias being there at all. How do you view these negotiations? Do you think that there's a possibility that we could see a real breakthrough before the U.S. elections?
Well, I'm skeptical about that. We have to understand 1559, as Mark said, is not something that is related to the situation between us and Lebanon right now. It's something that has to do with internal Lebanese issues. If they decide to implement it, great, but it's not something that we have to do with. But 1701 is also a problem, because 1701, we tried 1701, it failed miserably, and we ended up with what we are facing today. So definitely there's no way back from an Israeli point of view to 1701. People speak about an improved 1701. There are two improvements that have to be implemented on the ground. First of all, there got to be something that would prevent Iran from sending more arms to Hezbollah. And that was not in the original 1701. And secondly, the entire issue of supervision and monitoring and making sure that it is implemented properly has to be done by Israel first and foremost, because nobody else, no international power, is going to be able to enforce any new 1701 on Hezbollah. And that's why we have to make sure that we are allowed to take action if necessary. If we see that the commitment of Hezbollah according to 1701 are not performed appropriately, that we shall be able to interfere and take military measures in order to make sure that everybody is doing what they are committed to do. That's the two elements that Israel has to add to 1701. And I don't think that UNIFIL has a role in this 1701, because it's a mockery to allow the forces that were supposed to make 1701 be performed on the ground try again. That they failed and they're going to fail again. Israel has to assume the responsibility for performing the whatever they call it, 1701 or 4000. It doesn't matter. That's the new thing. And until that's been done, we are going to have to charge Hezbollah with heavier prices. Now, I'm skeptical, because I think that Hezbollah still believes that they can play around with the original 1701. They are paying very heavy prices, and they have to pay, and they have lost their leadership, they have lost a lot of their infrastructure, they lost a lot of their weapons, but they are still believing that they are the strongest party in Lebanon now, and that they can somehow survive this war and not pay the full price. That's why we need to charge them heavier prices. And what is happening in the last few days is that the price they're paying is becoming even bigger than what they've already paid. And yesterday, the population of the big city of Baalbek were forced to evacuate their homes so that we should be able to hit Hezbollah targets inside Baalbek without causing damage to the population. And this huge numbers of displaced people inside Lebanon is becomes a pressure on Hezbollah and on Lebanon in general. And I hope eventually this will turn into enough pressure on Hezbollah to accept an improved 1701. But I don't think we are already there.
So I'm going to take what you were saying right now, both about the leadership, about what Israel has done. And as we all know, we have those different lists that we show of the Hezbollah leadership that Israel has eliminated. And the Mir, as we know well, Naim Qassem now is the new Secretary General of Hezbollah, gave his first speech yesterday, did a little bit better than what he did in his former speeches when he was just kind of the interim. But of course, behind Naim Qassem, behind Hezbollah, we're talking about the Islamic regime of Iran. And 1701, Lebanon, 1559, all of those are about Lebanon. And then you say Hezbollah, and we connect back to Iran. And the rhetoric that's been coming out of Iran in the aftermath of the Israeli attack a week ago Friday is something where it's kind of changed over the last week. And I'm wondering in that sense of where we're going when it comes to both the bluster of what we hear from Naim Qassem, from Hezbollah, and how that impacts inside Lebanon, but the rhetoric that we're hearing directly from Iran and from the different figures there who are talking about a retaliation. And just like before, we may not get to a deal with anybody in Lebanon before the U.S. elections. Do you think it's possible that Iran could do something in Israel before the U.S. elections?
Possible, but not probable. And, it's a bittersweet achievement for Naim Qassem. Imagine the guy, 71 years old, so many years number two, deputy to Hassan Nasrallah, and he gets the good news, bad news message. The good news is that you are now number one. The bad news is that you know that there is an expiration date on whoever fulfills that role. The problem for Israel is not legal. It is not what is legally binding if there is a UN Security Council resolution, either 1701 or some other version of it. The question has to do with the Israeli defense doctrine and with the willingness of the governments, once there is some semblance of a deal, to go back, return from a ceasefire into a campaign, and have the residents who will be coming back evacuate again. How many times can you do that? And usually governments don't like, once they have been through a war or a campaign, they don't like to resume it so soon. They would rather turn a blind eye to what is happening following that deal. After October the 7th, perhaps this will change. No one will take a chance. And as for the bluster out of Tehran, just words. There has been a double turn, two U-turns in the assessment, which has to do with the Israeli counteroffensive 5 days ago. At first, Israel assessed that the Iranian response to the Israeli response would be simultaneous. Immediately after the Israeli Air Force struck the Iranian missiles and factories and other targets, the Iranians will retaliate once more. Lo and behold, they did not. And for the first couple of days, Israel reassessed and concluded that they are not going to retaliate. Then they changed their tone again. They started threatening once more. And now Israel is once again bracing for such a retaliation. But if you want to add it all up, it is mostly words. They have to say something to their domestic audience and their proxies. And one may safely conclude that there is less than even chance that they will do it anytime soon.
I'm not sure I'm as sure as you are in that sense. And I'm going to add into it, perhaps, Mark, we're in a countdown that's very clear, not to that Iranian attack that I don't know if it will happen, but to the U.S. elections that are going to happen this coming Tuesday. And I wonder in that sense, in that same kind of question, what does it look like from there? Do you think that Iran would take the chance right now, and because of the elections, actually attack Israel before? Do they look at the U.S. elections as something that they have to take into account? Is this something that's kind of on the agenda in the U.S. elections at all? Not the Israel against Hamas in the Gaza Strip or even Israel against Hezbollah in Lebanon, but is the Iranian issue right now something that's being spoken about in the United States?
Not at all, Mira. The fact remains is the major buckets of the U.S. election, the issues at dispute are economic policy, domestic policy, cultural policy, and then foreign policy. Candidly, I don't think anybody's focused on what's happening in your region right now. And I also think it's important for people to understand that it's really not next Tuesday that's the important date. It's January 20th. The election won't change anything here in America in terms of the policy. I think that the Biden administration is going to work to the last minute it's in office to try to achieve a breakthrough or two there. Now, the perception of America is a different story. It could very well be that Iran takes a look at who is elected on Tuesday and then decides how to act. If it's Trump, act one way. If it's Harris, act another way. But I think that it is unlikely for anything to happen between now and next Tuesday because, candidly, the issue is fairly inconsequential between now and next Tuesday.
And as I think about that right now, Yossi, I'm just thinking, of all of the years that you've been following the Islamic regime of Iran, the development of weapons inside Iran, the nuclear issue inside Iran. And over the last, I would say, month or so, suddenly I should say to everybody, you used to also be my boss many, many years ago, but I have been looking at the Islamic regime of Iran and going, wait a second, there was that one spy, he was paid money. And then there were two more spies and they were paid money. And I kind of feel that like one exposure of an Israeli recruited by Iran to the exposure of a couple and then of 7 and then of another 7 and of more in these last few days. How do you view what's been happening from that trickle to almost a flood of the exposure inside Israel of the Islamic regime of Iran's recruiting Israelis for money to spy against Israel?
Well, I think we have to look at it as a way of action that is preferred by the Iranians in order to, on the one hand, take action against Israel and charge it with a heavy price, and at the same time maintain some sort of deniability and not force Israel to retaliate heavily. So that's why they were postponing their missile attack for such a long time, because they were worried that if they launch a missile attack, Israel will respond and maybe even take action against the nuclear facilities. So I think that this new way of action enables them to have something that would bear the fruits they are looking for without causing them to take risks beyond what they want. Eventually, they failed. I mean, they had all this infrastructure, and they as you described it correctly, almost a flood of agents working on their behalf, trying to build up information and maybe sometimes even carry out operations against Israeli dignitaries. But nothing happened eventually. And so it's forced them to choose again, for the second time, heavy attack with missiles against Israel, knowing that it is extremely risky. And they knew that something like what happened last Saturday might have happened once they launch a missile attack. And this was not the first choice for them, but they decided to go for that nevertheless. And now, when talking about the next move, they are caught in between a rock and a hard place, because if they don't retaliate, in spite of the fact that they promised to retaliate and cause a lot of damage and so on and so forth, if they don't retaliate, they look very weak inside Iran, and they seem to not be able to come to the rescue of their proxies, especially Hamas and Hezbollah. And this is a very bad situation for them. But if they do, they give Israel exactly what Israel was looking for, an excuse to take care of the nuclear facilities. It's with American support. That's what Israel was looking for. Israel decided to go for the missiles, first of all, because it is important, but secondly, because there was no American support for something bigger than that. But if the Iranians are going to launch hundreds of missiles again towards Israel, I think that the American administration, before or even after the elections, is going to be in a very problematic situation if they don't support an Israeli very decisive retaliation.
I always wonder in that sense, and Amir, I'm sure you could help me out in that sense, that relationship between the U.S. military as opposed to the U.S. administration and between the Israeli military in the two attacks that the Islamic regime of Iran did directly against Israel. Again, do you think that there's like just a gap here between the way that CENTCOM and the different forces there view what's going on as opposed to administration, which is in a very different place? I'd love you to be able to flesh this out for me.
Sure, and I'm sure Mark Kimmett could expand on it. He has been a senior planner for CENTCOM. But let me just remark first on your question regarding the Iranian spies, those they tried to recruit. Perhaps tomorrow or next week, there will be a newspaper headline, scoop, no Iranian spy exposed today. It has been the spy of the day. Now, why do intelligence agencies go to this trouble of trying to recruit criminal elements? Because it has become difficult for various technological reasons to infiltrate your own agents into a foreign country, and it's easier to do it via locals who sometimes don't even know what their contracts want them to do. Who is the target, the human target that they are supposed to take care of, or why they are doing something. So, but that's intelligence. The intelligence communities and the military establishment of Israel and the United States have had an excellent relationship, starting perhaps following the Six-Day War in 1967, mostly after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and obviously over the last couple of decades, because these are brothers in arms. They understand each other, they train each other, they have protocols, but they are basically preparing options for their political masters. The decision is not theirs to make, only to execute.
Mark, I'd love to have you also weigh in onto this issue.
Yeah, I think that Amir is exactly right. There is this sensing of brother in arms, and we're just executing the will of our political masters, whichever country. I did the first political military talks with North Vietnam in 2009. My counterpart was a former North Vietnamese army officer. I had a Russian battalion working for me in Bosnia. I think you're ex-military as well. I think that soldiers understand soldiers regardless of where they come from, because at the end of the day, we're both just doing what our political masters are telling us, and we wouldn't be in these militaries if we didn't believe our political masters. But there is this notion that we're just following the orders of our superiors when they're legal. And so there's just naturally an affiliation between military people. Now, that's with our enemies. With our friends, I think it's important to understand that those friendships are important, and they aren't affected by what our political masters tell us to do or not to do. So we can stay somewhat black and white about the relationships, and we can let the political discussions and the political arguments and candidly the political decisions work themselves out in Technicolor. We're just going to do our job in black and white.
It's funny, Mark, as you were talking, I was really thinking to myself, as somebody myself who also, Yossi, in a very former, long time ago, I used to follow the Syrian military, and I always felt to a large degree that I had more in common with Syrian military officers that I've never met. They're the enemy. Then it's a common language, it's a common idea, and even when it's an enemy, let alone when you're talking about somebody who's an ally. As we're reaching towards the end of the program, I'd love to hear from each of you. Yossi, I'm going to start with you. Just what do you think then in these last days of what I said, the countdown towards the U.S. elections? Are we going to see something from Iran or not? Do you think that they'll arrive at a resolution with Lebanon or not? Let's try and finish with those two issues, and then we'll go on our way. Yossi, please.
Well, I think the most important thing is that we have to be prepared for the possibility that Iran will act even before the elections and definitely afterwards. That's even though they are deterred in several sorts of ways because they worry about what's going to happen, and they were totally exposed, unable to protect themselves, and very vulnerable in the Israeli attack. There are other considerations that might lead them to decide to act, and we have to be prepared. Even if the probability, as Amir said, is less than 50%, we have to be prepared. And in
I think
these
that's an
preparations, we have
excellent
to work
lesson.
together with the Americans, because on protecting Israel, there's a 100% agreement between Israel and the United States. And about the importance of looking at Iran as an enemy, a dangerous enemy, there's a 100% agreement. We still have our difference of opinion about what is the best way to deal with this threat. And we believe that eventually there's no other way but using force, because the Iranians are not going to give up their nuclear project just because they're worried about what we are going to do to them. But it's what's important, and for us, is that we have managed to prove to the Americans that there is a credible military option, because there was always some question mark hovering about this idea of a credible military option, and we proved that it is there, and that is very important. And this is going to have an impact also on Lebanon, because if Iran cannot protect itself, cannot help its proxies, then Hezbollah will have to make their own calculus and maybe reach the decision that, okay, we have to accept something that is more than 1701. So we are not yet there, but it's going this way. That's the important thing.
All right. Mark, very shortly, anything, the main message you'd like to say?
Yossi is exactly right. It doesn't matter if it happens before the election, doesn't matter if it happens before January 20th or after. In any case, you've got to be ready.
Thank you. Amir, final statement?
The hostage issue, the plight of the hostages is uppermost in Israelis' mind. And also, casualties drive public discourse and public mood. Hopefully, there will not be any, and not so many casualties, either military or civilian, in the near future.
I want to say amen to that. That is all of the time that we have. I want to thank our three wonderful panelists. I want to thank you at home. Shalom from Jerusalem.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.